Al-Farabi and the Philosopher's Stone. The door opened with a creak, and a candle flickered in the draught. The messenger's face was obscured in the darkness, but the person hunched over the table knew who the individual was and why they had entered. The most magnificent and exalted one gives you yet more time. By the rise of the seventh moon, all should be prepared. And do not forget that the executioner will swiftly ready his blade. From the Legend of Al-Farabi. Where is the philosopher's stone to be found? If one mixes in sulfur, mercury and gold in equal proportions, where was the elixir of life stored? Spherocones were used for this. Was Al-Farabi the alchemist? The instruments of Al-Farabi have been preserved. He used to heal people. Secrets from the depths of history, a recipe for immortality, and the arcane mysteries of the alchemists, Al-Farabi and the Philosopher's Stone. Chapter 1. The Secret of Chernozem Country. They practiced the art for one of three reasons, either due to propensity or philosophical enthusiasm, or due to rivalry and the desire to obtain the means to existence, or because of excessive avarice and ambition, which should be avoided. Al-Farabi, on the necessity of the art of chemistry. Examining the legend of Al-Farabi and finding its origins, there are no established paths in alchemy. Mystical Turin. There is a shroud here in which, according to legend, the body of Christ was wrapped. There is also a rather significant collection of artifacts from Egypt. In general, Egyptians thought that the brain was an absolutely redundant organ. When a body was being mummified, all of its organs would be taken out, including the brain. The heart would be left intact, however. According to their beliefs, the heart was where life began, giving a human the ability to think. To be able to mummify, one had to know how certain chemical processes take place in the body. According to one source, the science of chemistry is of Egyptian provenance. Even the word Kim or Kem means the country of Chernozem, or the Black Country, as ancient Greeks called Egypt, or the Chinese word Jin for gold. According to another source, the word originates from the Greek word hino, meaning to pour. At the time, Greek literature was being disseminated across all parts of the world and spread by word of mouth. So, it's only natural then that in the East people used this knowledge and applied it according to their needs. In Egypt, the patron of alchemists was Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. The Greek equivalent was Hermes, the god of trade, deceit and serendipity. The alchemists' containers of gold were sealed with an image of Hermes, and thus the expression hermetically sealed came about. The entire science of alchemy itself can be referred to as sealed off, since its secrets were hidden from the outside world. In their books, scientists never referred to the outcomes of this art. They tried to prevent the spread of such knowledge amongst laymen. They only wished to encourage a general thirst for knowledge, as such questions naturally preoccupy the human mind. Al-Farabi, on the necessity of the art of chemistry. In the 4th century BC, Alexander the Great conquered Egypt and established the city of Alexandria. His teacher, incidentally, was Aristotle. Over the course of several centuries, Alexandria's academy was the center of science and alchemy, followed later by Byzantium. In the 7th century, following the conquest of Egypt, its place was taken by the Arab Caliphate, which was a mighty and prosperous empire. The development of science and culture is the basis of any prosperity and global influence. This is true to this day. Caliphs, copying Alexander the Great, also started to become patrons of the sciences. Thus, an Arabic prefix, al, was added to the word chemi, or chemistry. Alchemy is an Arabic word. Alchemists, incidentally, didn't refer to themselves as such. They preferred to call themselves philosophers. The first associations that one has with the word alchemy is a wise and wicked person, either a sorcerer or a mad scientist who encodes each of their notes and fills them with mystical symbols. Under the candlelight, he mixes sulfur and mercury, dry lizards and frogs, while murmuring magical incantations so as to obtain gold from the resources available to him. Is this true, however? What's important here is the attitude to gold. Gold wasn't seen as an object of wealth or abundance, or an indication of one's status. For a true alchemist, gold was not the main goal. It was simply an instrument, an ideal material, and an eternal one at that. Therefore, as Al-Farabi also believed, the path of an alchemist was a journey towards perfection, a touch of eternity, and a comprehension of the secret of life. What is the Philosopher's Stone all about? Why was it such an object of desire? The alchemist's main goal was the search for the Philosopher's Stone, which wasn't in fact a stone at all, but rather a powder or powder solution, an elixir. This word is, incidentally, of Arab-Greek origin. Al-exir is translated as that same philosopher's stone. An Arab scientist, Jabir ibn Hayyan, who had lived a century before Al-Farabi, was the first to have voiced the belief that gold could be obtained from base metals with help from a specific catalyst, which he called an elixir. If one finds the philosopher's stone, that is a means to obtain gold, then that same means can be used to gain eternal health and consequently eternal life. Interestingly, in the 8th century, Jibek spoke of the possibility of creating live creatures by artificial means. The first test tube baby appeared, of course, only 12 centuries later. He also devised a simple recipe for longevity. One has to find a 10,000-year-old toad, then catch a 1,000-year-old bat, dry them both and grind them into a powder. Dissolve in water and take a spoonful every day. Jibek ibn Hayyan. All very simple. One just has to find a 1,000-year-old bat. It seems that Al-Farabi shared the skepticism and irony of his predecessor, but held a different view regarding the Philosopher's Stone and the transformation of metals. Why was Al-Farabi called the second teacher? How did he learn the art of alchemy? Where are the scientist's medical instruments kept? Chapter 2. The Alchemist from Otrar. Whosoever wishes to obtain the Philosopher's Stone should expand their knowledge in the various areas of philosophy, which is the absolute wisdom. Its knowledge gives a person an understanding of reality and of the essence of the art. Al-Farabi, on the necessity of the art of chemistry. an insurmountable difference of over 1,000 years and 1,000 kilometers, with cultural differences and language barriers. Despite this, however, they were united by their interest in philosophy. Here is Aristotle at the foot of the Acropolis, reflecting on the origins of the universe. Alchemy is said to have been first theoretically explained by Aristotle. He wrote about transmutation, or the transformation of base metals into precious ones. In ancient times, this was the route to Areopagus. Nowadays, tourists follow the same path. One has to be very careful when walking on the slippery steps that have been worn down by visitors. Al-Farabi expresses his views on the work of the first teacher, refining his thoughts to perfection. He successfully continued the work of Aristotle in logical research. One could say that he was the second Aristotle. Everyone believes that Al-Farabi is the second teacher. This is all due to the fact that in the Middle Ages, Aristotle was, perhaps, the most popular author and the most translated one, especially from ancient Greek into Arabic. However, simple translation was insufficient. One also had to interpret the texts correctly. The challenge was firstly that many centuries had passed and many concepts had changed. And secondly, a new religion of Islam had appeared, and this required revisiting the work of the ancient Greek scientist. Al-Farabi spoke Greek very well, and therefore he started studying the work of ancient Greek scientists, including Aristotle, Plato, and many others. He also translated their work into Arabic. Medieval philosophers moved across the entire Caliphate and studied constantly. Al-Farabi is known to have been a traveling scientist. He spent some time in Egypt, the homeland of alchemy. He started reading the work of the first teacher, Aristotle, who used to read in Alexandria. So, Al-Farabi took all the books from Alexandria and left for Cairo. It is probable that Al-Farabi read some of the ancient thinkers' work while in his homeland. It is likely that he developed an interest in alchemy there as well. During the excavations of Otrar and its outskirts, archaeologists would often find items that could be described as the tools of the alchemist's trade. Spherocones were used for that purpose. Have you heard of such things? Spherocones are tools made of clay. Here is a medieval exhibit at the Central State Museum of Kazakhstan. Those mysterious spherocones are kept here, just like in many other museums around the world. They have thick sides and a heavy base. The upper part looks like a sphere, while the lower part looks like a cone. These are highly unstable items, which were probably placed in special holders. Some of them would be made of glass and were called simab kuzacha, a decanter for quicksilver. These were used for keeping mercury-based medicines. It's not surprising. These vessels were widely used by craftsmen, apothecaries, and in everyday life. The effect of the interaction of gold and mercury had been known in Central Asia since the time of the Scythians. Amalgam is where you alloy mercury with another metal. The surface is covered with mercury, and when the smelting begins, the mercury and gold blend together. Of course, there were many charlatans amongst alchemists. However, there were also many genuine scientists who put their theoretical knowledge into practice. Some of these even became forgers. Coins made with alloys of other metals are quite a common finding among archaeologists. There were a ridiculous number of forgeries. People used to make counterfeit money and present it as real money. One example was in medieval towns where a large number of copper coins plated in silver were found. Many alchemists combined their studies with the practice of medicine. Al-Farabi is known to have been involved in healing the sick. Interestingly, in the Museum of Damascus, where the great scientist is buried, one can still find the medical instruments that he supposedly used. Al-Farabi's instruments have been preserved. He used to heal people. Apparently, while still in his homeland, Al-Farabi had read the work of Jibek ibn Hayyan, the most popular Arabic healer and alchemist at that time. It turns out that Al-Farabi, being so well versed in alchemy, really could have been involved in the production of gold. What did Al-Farabi write about alchemists? Where are the ancient manuscripts kept? How can one obtain the philosopher's stone? Chapter 3. Between the Truth and a Lie. I believe that those who describe this art tried to put a secret meaning into it, so it would only be understood by one as wise as they were. In their descriptions they used poetic expressions which sometimes resembled the truth and at other times lies. Al-Farabi, on the necessity of the art of chemistry. A cobbled street and colourful facades of small houses in Prague. The Golden Lane. Legend has it that alchemists lived here in the 15th century.
Печальная участь была этих самых алхимиков.
Those alchemists met a tragic fate. Few of them lived to old age. Some were burnt at the stake, while others died due to working with harmful substances, trying to create the philosopher's stone and artificial gold. Mercury vapor, for example, can be deadly.
Известно, что ее пары очень быстро приводят человека к смертному одру.
The science of alchemy appeared in Europe due to the Arabs who had conquered parts of the land that is now modern Spain. The entire Arabic and Islamic world was as one state. The greatest thinkers and scientists in our history lived during the Middle Ages. Could Al-Farabi have made gold for the Caliph of Baghdad? Alchemy was a practical art for most Arabs, and they did not only advance the art of chemistry. For example, one of the alchemists, nicknamed Ziryab the musician, was the first to have invented toothpaste and a certain type of deodorant. Another royal poet, alchemist and aviation engineer, Ibn Firnas, invented a parachute and a hang glider. This is one of the areas that holds potential interest for researchers. Some of Al-Farabi's previously unknown works were found in the library of Escorial several years ago. To this day, it contains a large amount of as yet unexplored Arabic manuscripts. Who knows what they may contain? Another interesting area for researchers is documents in Spanish archives and libraries during the Muslim period of Spain's history. Perhaps there are other manuscripts belonging to the scientist from Otrar. What if they contain the secrets of medieval alchemists written in encoded language? If they had not written so cryptically, then huge harm would have been inflicted on entire peoples and states, said Al-Farabi in his work, On the Necessity of the Art of Chemistry. Those who misunderstand it are divided into two types. The first type deny and distort it, while the second type acknowledge yet exaggerate its power. They are both mistaken. Al-Farabi, On the Necessity of the Art of Chemistry. Where and when the work was written remains unknown. Legend has it that he wrote it in Baghdad when he was supposedly summoned to correct the mistakes of a royal alchemist. It is documented that Al-Farabi indeed lived in that city during the reign of Caliph al-Muqtadir. He spent most of his life there. He lived in Baghdad for 20 years. Did he conduct alchemical experiments there? Was he looking for the philosopher's stone? Or was he making gold?
He learned here in this land the background of his knowledge with this Greek knowledge, the traditional knowledge of the Central Asia and Iran.
Al-Farabi was among the first to try to determine fact from fiction in alchemy. He vehemently criticized charlatans. He considered alchemy as first and foremost a part of the science of life, not the magic of turning base metals into precious ones. Here's the most popular alchemic recipe. If you mix in sulfur, mercury and gold in equal proportions, you can get the philosopher's stone. Apparently, alchemists throughout the ages never kept to the correct proportions. Thus far, no one has been able to create the philosopher's stone in the laboratory. Or have they? After all, alchemy was a hidden science. The actions of this art should be focused only on careful research and the comprehension of mineralogy, as well as the acquisition of credible knowledge in this area. Al-Farabi, on the necessity of the art of chemistry. His main point was that fundamental and applied research should complement each other and be interlinked, otherwise it would not yield any results. It is assumed that Al-Farabi was not a royal scientist and, on the contrary, tried to avoid dependence on those who held power in the world. The Otra philosopher's austerity and love of freedom have become part of his legend. He wasn't interested in personal wealth, nor in any other material gain. The only thing he was preoccupied with was science. What qualities should a scientist possess? What are the dangers of alchemy? And how did the legend conclude? Epilogue: The Gold of Al-Farabi. Al-Farabi was convinced that genius and malice were incompatible. Those who were cruel or unkind, but still saw success despite this lack of decency, were to be mocked or pitied. Al-Farabi believed that knowledge was precious, not metals. He believed that science could help to counter some of the baser human instincts and change humankind for the better. Our world changes not because of conspiracy theories, beliefs, or ideologies, but rather as a result of the actions of engineers and scientists. There is a reflection of the truth in the old fable. It may be said that the legend has been partially confirmed. Based on his academic work, Al-Farabi was very well versed in alchemy and even conducted laboratory experiments himself and possibly did other work in this area. One doesn't need to go elsewhere to find plot lines for a blockbuster or a compelling movie. One only needs to immerse oneself in the atmosphere of the time when he lived and worked. The legend continues. The ruthless Caliph ordered that the unlucky scientist be flogged and kicked out of town. When Al-Farabi learned of the way the Caliph had treated his fellow scientist, he decided to hide the recipe of alchemic gold that he had obtained and left Baghdad. Only the deserving ones can become privy to the secrets of life. Interestingly, this legend echoes the actual words of the scientist. Only a philosopher can fathom it. If someone who is not a philosopher acquires the knowledge, then tragedy will befall the world. Al-Farabi, on the necessity of the art of chemistry.